How you guys doing? I was going back there to get my Bible, and I was like, I'm just gonna sit back there. Maybe I'll sit like for 5 minutes and see what happens. Like, how awkward can we make it out here? Everyone's just kind of like, all right, it's time to go. We're gonna leave now. Um, I don't know. That's just how I think. We're gonna be in Ruth chapter 3 tonight. You guys can turn there. Good to see you guys. A few things on the docket of announcements. My wife just tells me I took cold medicine, so I'm not sure I'll be awake when you get home. My kids are sick, so she's not here tonight, unfortunately. But she did send me with one announcement, and that is on February 17th through the 20th, so that weekend, there's a retreat at the ranch, and we need some volunteers. And what that looks like is you don't pay anything. We actually even have rides up there, I guess. So all your food, lodging, and rides are available. You just need to partner up with the young adults who are already going up there to serve that weekend. So if you're interested, you can actually talk to, is Kylie not here tonight? Where's she at? Where's your wife? She's not here? Well, Keyshawn, he is connected to the lady who is organizing volunteers. Hi, Keyshawn. How you doing up there, buddy? So you can talk to Keyshawn. He'll be here afterwards. He'll be in back, probably hanging out where the food is. That's normally where Keyshawn's hanging out, right, buddy? And then also this Sunday is something important, I think. Gosh, I can't put my finger on. What is it? Super Bowl, that's right. And I know most people don't even care about football, especially now. It seems like a lot of people are just like, I don't even care who plays or whatever. But there's a good reason why we celebrate the Super Bowl, is so we can eat food together. And so this Sunday, we're going to do a young adult party down in the cafe at 3 p.m. So the Super Bowl starts, I think, at 3:30. But you guys are all welcome to come. And the only requirement is that you bring some delicious food to share. Right, Jordan? Am I missing anything? Don't bring garbage. Bring some good food. So you got to up the game, boys, over just a bag of Doritos. We can do better than that. The last time we did we watched the Lions game, what was that, like a month ago? And we're like, let's watch Lions instead of studying the Bible. So worth it. That was such a good game. But we actually, all the guys brought really good food too. We're like, wow, this is really good. We should do this again, like maybe at the Super Bowl or something. So they're doing this Sunday at 3 in the cafe. You guys, if you want to come hang out, you got nowhere to go. I think that's all I have. If you do have prayer requests, we have We have a prayer box in the back, right, Matthew? Where did he go? He left. I don't know where he's at. There's a prayer box back there, and you can put a prayer request in there, and we'll pray for you throughout the week. But let me go ahead and pray. And actually, let's read the chapter, and then we'll pray. It says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? And I'll give you guys context in a moment. But for now, if you don't know what's happening, you're just going to be lost. I'm sorry. He says, Now Boaz, whose young women you are with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. And he said to her, All that you say to me I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of a heap of grain. And she came softly and covered his feet and lay down. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and there was a woman lying at his feet. And he said, Who are you? And she said, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. Then he said, Blessed are you, Lord of my daughter. Blessed are you of the Lord of my daughter, for you have shown more kindness in the end than at the beginning, and that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for the people of my town know that you are virtuous women. Now, it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. Then he said, Do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Also, he said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid on her. And then she went into the city. And she came to her mother-in-law. She said, is that you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. And we'll stop there and pray. Lord, thank you so much for this story of romance and love and intrigue. Lord, there's so much we can learn from it, just about how you pursue us and love us. And there's just a lot of really good things to take away from this chapter. And I love the encouraging aspects of the word and just going through and being blessed by the things that are in it. And so we pray that would fall on us tonight, on our ears, as we're here to hear from you. We want to be men and women who seek you in earnest, Lord, that we're serious about meeting with you, God. And if we're not tonight, Lord, that you would kind of rattle our cage a little bit to help us recognize the importance of this time, God. It is sacred. Lord, anytime we open the word and we get to hear from you and we get to spend some time focused not on our troubles or our relationships or our trials or just all the garbage of this world, Lord, we get to come and focus on you tonight, God. I pray you just show up in tangible ways and show yourself to us, Lord, as we want to desire and hopefully do desire to know you tonight. And we ask this in your name. Amen. And again, I'll give you guys some context because we started the book a couple weeks ago. We're only in chapter 3. There's only 4 chapters. So guess what? We have one more week in the book of Ruth. And I really did it because I felt so, depressed is maybe the word, but I studied the end of the book of Judges. It did not leave a good taste in my mouth. I was not like, yes, depravity of man. The end of the book of Judges is an absolute mess. I won't recap it for you guys, but you can go read it on your own if you want to be depressed. Just absolute worst things ever. And they're all caused by man. And in stark contrast to that is the book of Ruth that took place during a similar time period of the book of Judges, just a completely different context. There's actually good things that came out of this time period and godly people and things were happening that were, we would call stories of redemption, stories of heroism and love. And, the story of Ruth, although it starts out kind of tragic, and I told you guys that, the start of Ruth is more like a Disney movie to me than anything, kind of like a fairy tale where you have a really bad beginning, some horrible event. And it seems like a very common theme in Disney movies where like a parent dies or something. It's like, Finding Nemo. I would let my kids watch the first 5 minutes of that movie is all I'm saying. Like, they don't need to know that Nemo's mom is gone. That's just, why would we ever share this with kids? They're just too young to understand. And so it starts off kind of tragic, but there's a lot of light in it and there's a lot of good stuff in it. And here's a story. Actually, one of my young adult guys finished it. He went and read the rest of the book. I didn't tell you guys to do that. He went and read it on his own. And then he came to me on Sunday night. He's like, it's kind of like a fairy tale. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what this book is like, except for it's true. It actually happened. And it's just that, we're in a part of the story, essentially, in chapter 3, where there's not like the adventure and there's not the bad guy. It's kind of like the development of the characters, where the characters are getting to know each other. I remember that scene in Little Mermaid where she finally gets legs and then she meets the prince and they walk around town and they have a wonderful day together. And then at the end of the day, they ended up a boat with a crab singing to him about kissing the girl. Something like that is what's happening in chapter 3. And again, if you haven't been here up to this point, this would be like the previously on portion of a drama that you watch on television. They're always like, previously on. And then they'll tell you what happened in the past. Well, up to this point, previously on, the book of Ruth, you had a man named Elimelech, who was a Jewish man who took his family, his wife and 2 sons, to a foreign land called Moab because there was a famine. They left their hometown, they left the nation of blessing, went to a foreign land, and actually when they got there, the dad died. So Elimelech passed away, leaving his wife Naomi and their 2 sons who married foreign women. One of them was Ruth, for the namesake of this book, and another one was Orpah. And It wasn't too long, I think about 10 years later, that both the sons died. So now you've got 3 ladies left without husbands. And Naomi at that point was like, why am I here? My family's back in Israel. My sons have died. My husband's passed away. So she decides to pack it up, head back home to Bethlehem, which is where she was from. And at that moment, she tells her daughters-in-law, you guys should go home too. And Ruth was stubborn. She says, I'm not going to leave you. Wherever you go, I'm going to go. And she follows Naomi back to Israel, where they're welcome and greeted. And if you remember, Naomi's name means pleasant, but she says, don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter. She's like, my life is awful. And I went away full, but I came home empty. And at that point, they're in a position, again, in that society, in that culture, in that time, where they should have been absolute poverty-stricken. There's no way for anyone to support them. They didn't have social welfare or anything like that. And so they were the poorest of the poor class, very low rung of society, having no rights to land, having no male in their household to provide for them. And so they're pretty dire straits. And so in chapter 2, you have Ruth going to work, essentially, to provide for them. And she goes to the fields, as was customary in that time. The poor people were allowed to follow after the harvesters and pick up small parts of the grain to provide for their family. And so she did that. And while out on, event, gathering parts of barley, a relative of hers named Boaz noticed she was in his field and I don't know if he knew her by name, but who was like, that woman, she needs to stay here. And something caught his eye about her. It could have been just her beauty, but something more than that, as we'll see in the story. And he began to ask her to stay in that field and began to show her favor. He would have his own guys purposely drop the barley for her to pick up, be like, oh yeah, I'll drop some there, go ahead and pick it up, so she didn't have to go and just scrounge around and find extra stuff. And eventually she was able to go home to Naomi and share what had happened, how her relative, or close relative somewhat, was able to provide for her. And then Naomi's like, this is such good news. This is really good news. And that's where chapter 3 comes in. And she says, again, Naomi says, the mother-in-law said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term yenta. Have you guys heard this term before? Yenta is a term that typically means like a gossip or a busybody. It's applied in the Jewish culture. Like talking like modern culture, yentas are the ones who are like matchmakers, right? And so they're trying to put you together with your friend, and I have a cousin who you should date him. He's a doctor, and the kind of thing. Well, Ruth is about to get yented. She's about to get set up by her mother-in-law, and it's important for her to be happy. She's like, Ruth, you need to be happy. I'm looking for security. That word for security also means like rest or peace. She's like, I need you to have a life of rest, of comfort and safety under the care of a strapping, good husband. And it's not that you can't have security without a husband, all right? Watch out, woke mob, right? But one of the things that a husband offered, besides being able to reach the really tall stuff in the kitchen, like that's my main job at home, or lift really heavy stuff, I can lift it over my head. Security is what husbands would offer during this time, because again, Ruth and Naomi, in all their circumstances, they've lost so much, and there's so much uncertainty about their future. They didn't know if they're going to have a place to stay. They didn't know if they're going to have food to eat. They didn't even have a guarantee of their next meal. It's why Ruth was working in the fields, just gathering grain. And the only other option for a young woman in Ruth's position during this time period to provide for herself would have been harlotry. So you see the opportunities here. It's like I can become a beggar in the fields, or I can become a harlot. And even in that, there's no security in the sex slave. It might provide income for a while, but man, that's obviously a dark route to go, and it would have been awful for her. But fortunately, Ruth doesn't have to, because she has an alternative. And that alternative is in verse 2. It says, now Boaz, this is Naomi again, setting her daughter up. Have you seen Boaz? Whose young women you are with, is he not our relative? And that might sound bizarre to you, I don't think you're supposed to marry relatives, are you? Maybe that would be the question you'd ask someone before you dated them. Am I related to you? I probably shouldn't date you then. But this is, again, a different time period. Having a relative that wasn't your brother or your sister was actually a good thing to know. And obviously, she's from Moab. She's not relative in blood at all. So there's nothing weird about that. She goes, is he not your relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. And we met Boaz last week in chapter 2. He's the Prince Charming of the story, if you will. He was the family's kinsman redeemer, meaning he's like the head of the household, head of the family, not just his own family, his intermediate family, but like his extended family. And I told you last week there are two responsibilities of the kinsman redeemer. I lied to you. There's actually more than that. But the two I told you about was you had to buy people out of slavery. So if your family were so poverty stricken that they sold themselves as slaves and they couldn't pay the debt that they owed, you could purchase them out of redemption. You didn't have to. You could be like, nah, I think slavery looks good on you. But you could purchase them out of slavery. And that actually was your responsibility as a kinsman redeemer. Or the other one was to seek out revenge in a matter of like a manslaughter case. I told you about this, right? And so you want to get revenge for the person who killed someone close to you. That was the obligation of the kinsman redeemer. Well, there's actually two more responsibilities I didn't tell you about. One is kind of boring, but it's to buy back land. Had someone sold their land, understand, went with the family. So it stayed in the family for as long as the family was around. As long as they had a name in the land, they had the rights to that land. And so if you sold it, you were only supposed to sell it for a period of time. And let's say you sold it and rented your land basically because you couldn't pay your bills, you're supposed to be able to get it back. And so the kinsman redeemer could purchase it back for you. The fourth and probably most important responsibility of the kinsman redeemer was to carry on the family name, okay? The family name. And this may seem in our culture, like irrelevant, like who cares if that family name dies? But in the Jewish culture, it was very important. You remember Elimelech had sons, but his sons had passed away. And his daughters didn't have any kids. And so they don't have any male in their family to carry on their family name. And so it would be the responsibility of the nearest kinsman, actually, you guys, to marry, this is Old Testament law, to marry a widow who didn't have that family name to carry on, to marry her and take the family name on for himself to carry that name out. And understand, this was a big deal to the Jewish culture, that the family name had a lot to do, again, with their heritage, had a lot to do with their property, had a lot to do with just their culture in general. And you didn't want to let that family name die off. It's why it was so important for the Jews to not let the tribe of Benjamin die off. It's like they're part of our family, even though those guys had done some awful things, right? And so there's this whole importance with the Jewish culture to make that name last. And perhaps the most important part of being a kinsman redeemer, redeeming that name, keeping that name alive. My brother, by the way, kind of related to this, but my brother married into the Butts family. His father-in-law's last name is Butts, like B-U-T-T-S, Butts, right? And he was actually, you guys, I don't know if you guys had him in school. He was a PE teacher at one point, and his name was Mr. Butts. And he had two daughters. His brother had daughters, so they have no sons to carry on the Butts name. And the Butts name is going to end, is what I'm saying. It's the end of the butt, is all I'm saying. I'll stop. I think I don't know this for sure. I didn't ask my brother this, but I'm pretty sure my brother actually was asked by his father-in-law if he would change his last name. And I'm pretty sure this is true, but I wasn't going to say it because I didn't nail it down, but I'm pretty sure that happened. He's like, will you carry on the Butts name? And my brother's like, no way. No, not happening. Let that name die. You can imagine the kind of mockery you got growing up with the last name Butts. Anyways, so verse 3, this is important. He is a kinsman redeemer. Therefore, Naomi tells Ruth, wash yourself, anoint yourself. That means like put on some fragrance. Put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Well, the threshing floor was after they had gathered the barley or the wheat or whatever they were gathering, is a place where they'd actually separate it out and be able to make it useful, right? So that's where that Boaz was at. Naomi knew this. She's setting them up on a date, essentially. I want you to go and meet him there. And her advice to win Boaz over is pretty straightforward and simple. Make yourself look nice. Make yourself smell good. And approach him at an opportune time. I told you guys, and I'm going to talk about this more next week as we close the book, but there's a lot of types in this. There's pictures of Christ and our relationship with him in this story. And this romance between Boaz and Ruth is a picture of Christ and his love for us. And if we are Ruth, guys, I know this is hard to understand, but just go with me for a moment. If we're Ruth in this story, just think about that. As we go to the Lord, who's Boaz in the story, like there's a presentation about how we come to him. And so consider that, like, you don't just get to come however you are. And I know that goes against everything we've ever heard about Jesus. Like, you can just come as you are, right? Well, that's true. But as believers, when we come to Christ, we are dressed in his righteousness. So we don't bring all of our junk with us. We are robed, and Christ sees us as his own. He doesn't see our mistakes and our failures. He sees his righteousness in us. And so that's kind of cool. We come dressed in the righteousness of Christ, and we have to make sure, again, our hearts are right before him. There's also an important time to approach him. In fact, throughout different times in here, periods of history, that approach has been different. For example, in the Old Testament, if you wanted to approach the Holy of Holies, the place of intimacy with God, where you can meet with him and see him, you had to approach him. Actually, you couldn't do it. Only the high priest could do it once a year, and he had to do it for the atonement for the sins of the people. He would go and he would make himself dressed right. He would make sure he was washed and purified and his heart was right before he went in to see God. And so that approach, again, was important, and the way you did it was important. You couldn't just walk into the Holy of Holies. In fact, there are guys who tried and it didn't go well for them. There was an approach that had to be right? You had to, again, do the things in the steps that you're supposed to. Now, what does the Bible say about how we approach the Lord now? Hebrews 4, this is my first verse for you guys. Hebrews 4:15 says that this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses. We're speaking about Jesus. He is the high priest. He understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. And so the difference between the high priest in the Old Testament, although the reason that they would go to a priest is because a priest could kind of relate to them. The difference between that priest and our high priest is perfect, and he understands us perfectly. So, in conclusion, let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we'll receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So the timing of our approach now is whenever we need him, which is pretty cool because, again, Jesus both dresses us in his righteousness and then makes us approachable and appropriate to approach him at any time. It's all because of him. And, again, why is Boaz here sleeping among the grain? You might be asking that question in your mind, like, what's he doing there? Why is that a thing that they would sleep with their harvest? It was pretty practical, just to protect it from thieves. And so they just finished bringing in a whole, we got to attribute this as like ancient currency. This would be like having piles of cash that you just collected in a barn. You'd be like, we'll just leave it in there. It's probably good. No, you go lay on the piles of cash with your shotgun is what you do. Like, no one's going to steal my cash. And so I think it's kind of cool because even in that, you see the Redeemer protecting the blessing of his bride, because it was the grain that he would give to Ruth in this story, right? So he's protecting it so she could have it. In verse 4, it goes on. It says, then it shall be, this is, again, Naomi speaking to Ruth about this, what's going to happen. Then it shall be when he lies down, he takes a nap, that you shall notice a place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. And he said to her, all that you say to me I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Now, this whole business about her laying down at his feet and uncovering them is not scandalous. Some people read the stories like, uncovering his feet? Whew. This is like steamy romance novel right here. There's nothing romantic about this gesture. In fact, to do this was a sign of humility. It was a sign of subjection. This would be something that a servant would do for their master, as to say, Master, I'm here at your feet. Whatever you want from me, here I am. That was the picture here. And so Ruth comes not like scandalously or trying to flirt with him or something. She comes in humility, seeking Boaz's rescue. As he's a kinsman redeemer, right? Thinking that he can rescue my family name, redeem our family name. And she's putting herself in quite a precarious position because there's a whole lot of risk, because Boaz, he could reject her and refuse her and humiliate her. And she has, she's in a position where, again, she's in humility proposing, essentially, that he do this for her. And this is exactly what it is. It's a proposal. She's asking him to marry her. It's pretty bold. It's a pretty bold proposal. I mean, her life was essentially in Boaz's hands now. She's at his feet. And, she could see how she was just probably on pins and needles, nervous about what his response was going to be. This is the engagement proposal in reverse for our culture, right? I don't know anyone personally. I know it happens, but I don't know anyone personally who's had the bride propose to the groom. And maybe you know someone, that's cool, whatever. It's not to say it's like outside of the outrageous or outside of the context of the scripture, because the only proposal I know of in scripture is this one, and it's a girl asking a guy to marry him. So in the classic sense of a proposal. It says, verse 8, now it happened at midnight that the man was startled. So she uncovered his feet, lay down there for we don't know how long. But he eventually woke up and found this woman lying at his feet and said, who are you? So she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. You could imagine when he wakens and the sight of a woman at his feet, and he's like, it's too dark to recognize it's Ruth. He's like, who's there? Who is that? And, my kids routinely come into my bed at night to the point where honestly, a bear could crawl into my bed and it wouldn't wake me up. I'd be like, whatever. But this is not normal for him. So this comes, she's at his feet and she's like, what is this? And she invokes the responsibility of the goel. It's a Hebrew word for kinsman redeemer. In fact, that's the word that she uses for close relative there. You're my kinsman redeemer. And again, this is the offer of proposal to him, essentially, that he needs to redeem the family name and marry me. This is what she's saying to him. Will you marry me? Except for, again, she wasn't on one knee with a ring. She's at his feet at a threshing floor in the dark. Maybe not as romantic as our minds make it, but you get the idea here. She's asking him not to buy land or to buy her out of slavery or to avenge the death of a loved one. She's asking him to carry on the family name, the family name of her dead husband, Naomi's son. And again, this is not traditional, but it's not extraordinary in the sense that it wasn't something that didn't happen. This is something that was, I would say, more common to Jewish culture, not something that was probably super common among the Jews, but it did happen. In fact, in Jewish weddings to this day, this is a part of the Jewish wedding, is the guy will wear like a scarf, and in the wedding, he'll put part of the scarf or throw the skirt of it's called a talith over her. And this symbol is a symbol of protection or covering her, and it comes from this passage. And that's what she's asking for Boaz. She says, will you marry me and take me under your wing? Will you cover me with your husbandry, if you will? And we don't really know if this proposal happened because, she didn't have any friends recording it to put on Instagram or anything. So how can we know the proposal really even took place? I mean, we'll just have to take the scripture by its word, because that's the only way we know nowadays if a proposal happened is if our friend's in a bush recording it. But back in the day, that's not how it worked. So we'll just trust that it really took place. It says, verse 10, then he said, blessed are you, Lord of my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning. And that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. Now, there's three things of interest that I found in these verses. First, Boaz gladly accepts the proposal. He's like, yes, this is good. I want this. He's even flattered. He's like, I can't believe you didn't go after younger studs out there, honestly, because he finds her to be someone who's absolutely beautiful, and he must be older, maybe less attractive, we don't know, but he at least thinks that she's way out of his league. And he's like, that you would even consider me. Like, wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much. And second, he agrees to fulfill his obligation as the Goel, in part because of a reputation. He's like, the people in the town know you as virtuous. There's something about you. Everyone knows who you are. You've got a great reputation. You're highly regarded, and you're this woman of valor. In fact, the word he uses there is this word halil. In Hebrew, it's the idea of moral strength, of good quality, integrity, virtue. It's in fact the same word applied to heroes of the faith in the Old Testament. So you're talking mighty man of valor. That's the word here he's applying to her. And she surely embodied the highly regarded but attainable list of qualities in Proverbs 31. So you have a list in Proverbs 31 of all the things that, women should strive to be in a relationship. She was those things. She embodied those things. And Boaz was like, wow, I consider myself a lucky man. But as in every fairy tale, there's an obstacle. And it's not a bad guy in this one necessarily, although he could be a bad guy. I'm going to paint it like a bad guy next week. Like, this guy is the worst villain ever. And we're going to just do some backstory that's not in the scripture about how he tried to kill everyone and murder all the children. But for now, we don't know anything about him, but we do know there's a relative that's closer to Ruth than Boaz is. And I don't know how Boaz knows this. Actually, I do know. He investigated this circumstance already. When he saw Ruth and he began to fall in love with her, he's like, I must marry that woman. And then he's like, there's probably some obstacles here, and being one that there might be someone closer to me in the kinsman-redeemer relationship, so I need to investigate this. Ruth had no idea. We'll find out from the end of in the chapter. She had no idea about this, and so she had not fully looked into it. But he basically has to tell her, I want to marry you, but I don't know that I can. And we need to keep it hush. And not because there's something scandalous happening here. He's not like, you sneak out when no one else is watching because this looks inappropriate. There was a bunch of dudes laying in barley in a barn. This was like a bar scene or something. This was not anything inappropriate. It's more so because he doesn't want word to get to this other kinsman, this closer relative, that he is somehow subverting his authority and right to Ruth. That guy has the authority, first right of refusal, if you will, to go and take Ruth for himself. First right of refusal. By the way, in my circle of friends, we have a thing called the first right of refusal. It has completely different context. And this is important for you guys if you're going to be married one day. Ladies, listen, pay attention. The first right of refusal is that your husband gets to say no to your leftovers before you offer them to someone else. That's your husband's first right of refusal, right? You don't get to offer your french fries to another guy if your husband's present. He gets to say, no good, babe, I'm good. Then he can give them to someone else. But if you go and give them to someone else before you offer it to him, even if you know he doesn't want them, that's offensive, okay? Don't do that. I've had fights over this stuff, okay? I'll tell you this right now. It's worth fighting for. Verse 14, I'm joking, but I'm not. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. Then he said, do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And that's the part I was talking about. He's not embarrassed about this. He's protecting her name. He's protecting this transaction that could potentially take place. And he also said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid it on her, and she went into the city. The thing that's interesting about this, as she would go and she gathers her scarf, basically, so he could put barley into her hands. If you notice in your Bibles, the word ephah is in italics. The reason it's in italics is because it's not in the original Hebrew. The translators are trying to assume what the original text is implying there. And basically, the original text reads it this way. When she held it, he measured 6 of barley. I'm like, 6 what? What does that mean? And so we don't know exactly what the measurement is. I'm pretty sure it's not an ephah. I told you last week, 1 ephah is like 1.5 gallons. And so, and I read a commentary that said a whole sack, and that doesn't even make sense to me because I read a commentary that said this could be like 33 gallons of barley. I'm like, he loaded up with a sack of barley, like a giant barrel. Here, take this barley with you. Loads her up. I could see a guy doing that, by the way, like overly zealous. Like, I want to get her a gift. I'm going to get her, take this with you. And she's like, thanks, and like whatever. But I don't think that's what actually happened, right? I think the translators are probably like, it's probably more like handfuls. He grabbed 6 handfuls of barley to give to her. And he's like, it's this romantic gesture, but it's not ridiculous is my point. Because like 33 gallons of barley would be pretty outrageous. Like, really, I don't think I need that much barley ever. That's nuts. My wife was telling me the other day that a friend of hers, she's trying to convince me that a friend of hers got $600 pants, and she wanted $600 pants. I was like, what? Like, what kind of pants are these? This is what I'm saying. I'm like, I told her, there's no way I'm spending $600 on pants. I think she's telling me because she thought if I knew her friend got the pants for $600, I would give her $600 pants. And I was like, there's no way. I'm not doing it as a matter of principle. I don't care if these are diamond-studded, gold-laced pants. They're not worth. And then I realized, like a moment later, she said the word pans. And I was like, oh, pans. Yeah, that makes more sense. Like $600 pants doesn't make any sense at all. And after she told me, like, if you would have told me first, like, $600 pans, I would have been like, that's kind of spendy for pans, isn't it? But since she had told me it was $600 pants, or I thought I heard $600 pants, $600 pans sounded like a deal, is all I'm saying. I was like, yes, do it, babe. Buy those $600 pans. Absolutely. Don't even hesitate. As long as it's not $600 pants, I can't do that. I'm going to go broke. That would have been an extravagant gift. Verse 16, when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, is that you, my daughter? Then she told her all the man had done for her, and she said, these 6 ephahs of barley, 6 handfuls, sorry, he gave me, and he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. So she returns to her mother-in-law, tells her all that had happened. And again, we realize that these guys didn't know there was a closer redeemer. Otherwise, they probably would have tried to deal with that first. But Boaz certainly looked into it. And he was planning a way to make Ruth his bride before that. And the chapter ends on this cliffhanger of what's going to happen to the romance. Will this nearer kinsman redeemer come in and decide that he has the right to marry and be the one to redeem Ruth and her family name? Or will he relinquish that right to Boaz? And what's that going to look like? Is there going to be all kind of evil villainy? Is it going to go bad? We'll have to find out next time because we're not going to finish the chapter today. And we'll do it next week. But I was going through this chapter, and I over and over just noticed some themes here. Maybe you guys saw some themes with me. And I titled the study Biblical Dating Advice because I was like, there's some sound biblical dating advice from this chapter. Like how do we have godly relationships? And I just want to give you guys some tidbits, and I hope you guys are paying attention and you take some notes tonight because I think these are important and helpful that will hopefully benefit you if you're either engaged in a relationship currently or you're already married even. This is helpful stuff. Or you're like prospects of most people like looking to get married as you are young adult men and women in here, and I expect that to be a lot of you guys. And so this is my first advice tip, if you will, and it goes to the guys. Guys, ladies want security. Okay, I'm looking at you dudes. Ladies want security. And so security, again, was what Naomi was looking for her daughter-in-law because she knew Ruth needed to have rest. She needed to have a security, a peace. Again, that's the word translated, right? Something that ladies, you guys are looking for as well in relationships. They're looking for security. They want someone who can both provide for them and protect them in their marriage. They want someone who can, watch out for them, and not just provisional and practical things. I was thinking like a lot of times we're thinking, well, I'm the breadwinner, right, guys? I'm going to go and make the bread or buy the stuff buy the stuff that makes the bread or whatever it is. And we think of it things like that. We're practically providing like food and nourishment and shelter. And I know these are like what we call old like paradigms of how relationships work, because I know a lot of ladies work now and they provide as well. My wife actually made 50% more than I did when we first got married. And so she was the breadwinner in a lot of ways. But at the same time, my wife was looking for me to be the provider, and not just, again, practical things, but also spiritual things, nurturing things, watching out for her, to care for her. And protection, again, not just from obvious, things like bad guys. It's like, babe, I got this. I'll watch your back. No one's going to hurt you. She's also looking for like just my presence is comforting to my wife. Just having me around. She wants me to be around. She wants to have me, close to her. And it's not that she's overly anxious, and not that she's someone who gets anxiety over things really easy, but to have her husband around is really comforting for her. And we can make grand gestures to women, like buying them $600 pants, or we can just be faithful, right? I think covering our bride or our potential bride or our date with steadfastness, like to be someone you can count on. That's so important, you guys, to be someone who is so faithful like the Lord is. And in fact, there's a verse that was related to this passage in Ezekiel 16:8, speaking of how God looks over us. It says, when I passed by you again and looked upon you, indeed your time was the time of love. So I spread my wing over you and covered your nakedness. Yes, I swore an oath to you and entered into a covenant with you, and you became mine, says the Lord God. And just as Boaz offered Ruth something that she could not have without him, he offered her security. I'm going to take you under my wing, or actually she asked him for it, but he gladly accepted that proposal. But not just financial security, right? Also security that her family would not be neglected, that they would be safe and taken care of, that her family's name would live on, that legacy would live on, and that more importantly, she would have a future and a hope that was certain. She wouldn't be wondering again how the next week is going to go, if she's going to survive, or she's going to have enough food. And guys, I will say this, ladies haven't changed in this regard. They're not different than they were in Bible times. If you have no security to offer a woman, and what I mean by that is I'm not just talking about like viable, source of income, although that's important, and direction in your life, also important. Like having some stability in your life choices, that kind of stuff. What's more important is that, again, spiritual security, that you're someone who's stable. You're someone who they can trust. You're someone who's faithful. And you're someone that, again, they could say, that guy loves Jesus, or that girl loves Jesus. That's the kind of security a woman wants from a guy, is someone who's got a solid foundation in the Lord, and they trust him. And then that is something, again, I would say at least godly ladies are looking for the most, is find a guy like that, and I would say he's a keeper, ladies, right? Find a guy who loves Jesus, and he's someone you want to put your security in, if you will. Number two, this also is to guys. This isn't, by the way, just for guys tonight, but the first two happen to be just for the dudes. Guys, ladies want to be desired. Ladies want to be desired. Why does Ruth get prettied up and dressed up nicely to see Boaz? It's like, maybe she wants to impress all of her friends. Like, I'm going on a date with Boaz. I'm going to put it on Insta and make everyone jealous. Maybe she did it because I'm not going to go in there undignified. I need to look nice, for myself, for my own self-worth. No, wrong. I could say she did it because Naomi told her to do it, but obviously she's like, yes, this is a good idea. She wanted to be wanted. She wanted Boaz to see her, even though it was dark. When Boaz finally did see her and his eyes adjusted, he knew who was Ruth. He knew who she was, and that was something that, again, she desired from him, was to be desired. And I understand girls are complicated. That statement doesn't even begin to express what I really mean when I say that. Guys, there's no way you're going to figure out what a girl is thinking all the time, or most of the time. But what I do know is that girls want someone who wants them. Like, there's sometimes a tough exterior that ladies will put on, like, I don't need anyone, I'm self-sufficient. And sometimes that's their past relationships. They've been hurt or broken, or, maybe the relationship in their family. They've seen, like, instability. But ultimately, ladies want to be won, not fought over, but they want to be pursued. They want to be swooned over. And if you're a guy who's like, well, I'm going to play hard to get, you're an idiot. I'll just say that. Like, I remember my wife and I were like early stages before we were dating, like, but almost dating. We're just hanging out a lot. We went on a retreat with our young adult group, and we weren't really hanging out in the group setting. And so I just kind of ignored her all weekend. That was really stupid of me. I had to do a lot of apologizing at the end of the weekend. I was like, I'm real sorry. I didn't know how to act. I'm just an idiot. And, my wife, she wants my attention all the time. She wants to know that she's the center of my world. And it's not just her. Ladies in general, my daughter is exactly the same way. My daughter wants me to come and watch her play in her room. Like, she just wants me to sit in a chair and be like, hey, Dad, will you just stare at me as I play with my dolls? My son, if I came in and just sat and stared at him as he played with his Legos, he'd be like, what are you doing, Dad? Like, why don't you come play Legos with me? Build this Lego for me. But my daughter, she just wants me to watch her organize her kitchen stuff. And actually, this is the thing I found with my daughter is if I just like seriously stare at her, I just like give her like this intense gaze, like she starts blushing. She'd be like, "Oh, Dad," like she loves it. She loves it. And I was thinking about this. Like, this is the most romantic book besides this book in all scriptures, Song of Solomon, right? There's a line in that when the bride is speaking, and she says in Song of Solomon 7:10, "I am my beloved's," and there's another verse that says, "My beloved is mine," which is cool, but this one says, "I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me." And that's exactly the expression that I think, you see here in this chapter of wanting to be wanted. Like Ruth wants to have a man pursue her. She wants Boaz to not just go, "I guess I'll fulfill my familial obligation and I'll be your kinsman redeemer." No, he wants her to want her. Like there's that aspect of it. And if you find a godly girl, guys, chase after her, not literally, but like make her feel loved. She wants to be desired and not forsaken or forgotten or deprioritized. Make her the center of your world as far as she's concerned, and then keep her there. I think that's one of the ways you have a healthy relationship that lasts, a long time is you continue that aspect of that relationship where you make her feel important. There's security in that even. This one's for the ladies. Ladies, pay attention. This is important. Ladies, guys want to be left alone sometimes, all right? I'm kind of joking, but not really. Ruth, she was told, good advice, by the way, by Naomi, to wait until the appropriate time to approach Boaz. Like, don't just come in guns blazing, like, kick down the door. "Hey, babe, I'm here, kinsman redeemer." She knew that if his attention was on his dinner, it probably wasn't going to be on her at the same time. And I don't want to paint guys as idiots who can't concentrate on two things at once. But if the shoe fits, it's like, there are times, you guys, I'll tell you this, girls, guys will not give you the attention. And namely, those times are like when there's food in front of them, or there's a game on TV, a football, or a controller in their hand. And it's not to say that we're not interested or we don't like you or desire you. It's just to say that guys are very one-dimensional, and you shouldn't expect much from us, is all I'm saying. Set the bar much lower, is all I'll say. There's an approach when you want to seek someone's attention. I'll give this practically. Like, a lot of times girls want to talk to guys after, like, a long day of work, and they've been around guys and talking to guys all day long, and they'll be like, "What'd you talk about?" Like, I just talk to people all day long, and I don't want to talk to you right now. There's an approach about it. And you guys, I understand that actually if you are willing to give yourself in the worst of those times when you don't feel like talking, that's actually showing a lot of love, and that's great. There's a really cool thing about that. But usually after a long day, like, guys just want to rest. They want just to check out. You guys have heard the term man cave. I've never heard of a woman cave. They don't have those. I've never gone to someone's house and say, "Check out my woman cave." Like, that doesn't exist. It shouldn't exist. The reason guys have these places is not so we can escape women. It's not so we can escape, just to hang out with our buddies or something. It's so we can escape everything. Like, we just want to shut off the brain sometimes. It's not like we're going and conspiring against anyone with just the X chromosomes. Like, we all get together and we're doing stuff in the man cave together. Like, most of the time, we're just recharging the batteries. It's a hobby. It's a place. It's somewhere we go. For me, I prefer music or go golfing with my friends. And my wife knows that I prefer her 100% above everything else. But I say at the same time, it's good to have time where, again, there's an approach there. And I'm not advocating that married couples take separate vacations or something. I think that's nonsense. But there is wisdom about how we approach the opposite sex and when we approach the opposite sex. And it really goes both ways, but this story kind of illustrated the way that girls can approach guys. So I just wanted to use that and give you that little dating tip. There you go. That one's on me. Number 4. This is just general, is submission is a two-way street. And this isn't necessarily for a dating relationship. This is just a godly relationship in general. But we saw very clearly the humble submission of Ruth. She set herself at the feet of Boaz in subjection to him as his servant, essentially. But we shouldn't forget the submission that Boaz was practicing in giving in to her request. He chose her best over his own, which in its simplest form is what submission is about. I'm looking out for those around me. It's not about ruling over someone who's weaker or in less authority than you. Submission is about honoring both the place and position, but also the value of that person. And while a marriage relationship, the husband is to be the head. This is from Ephesians chapter 5 and 1 Peter 3. The husband is to be the head of the relationship. There's, in fact, in Ephesians chapter 5, the preamble to that, like right before that, when it's talking about submission in general, it says this in verse 20. It says, we're to be giving thanks always to God, for the Father, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of God. So my wife is to submit to me as a spiritual leader of our house because I represent Christ. But there are many times when I submit to her in areas of her domain and wisdom and leading and guidance. And in matters of the family, for example, I consider her to be like our guardian, the one who watches over our family. And I submit to her in matters of our children and discipline. All the time I go to her because she has a lot more insight to the kids and how they can receive it and their physical and emotional health as well as their spiritual health. She has insights to so many things in so many areas that I need help in. I was reading a commentary and it said this: in the marriage relationship, many husbands wish they had a wife who submitted to them the way Ruth is being told to here. But do they provide the kind of godly leadership, care, and concern that Boaz showed towards Ruth and others? And the flip side, in the marriage relationship, many wives wish they had a husband who loved, cared, and treated them the way Boaz did towards Ruth. But do they show the same kind of humble submission and respect showed to Boaz? So we each have our roles in marriage. Again, I defer to my wife often in areas of her strength and my weakness, and she does vice versa, the same thing. And just her being under my authority doesn't make her less valuable to me, or less valuable, or less important. In fact, you consider that because Christ, it says in the gospel, submitted to the Father his will. He says, not my will, but your will be done. Does that make Christ less valuable or less quality? I don't think so. That's nonsense, right? And so submission is not about quality or character or worth or intellect or power. It's about position and responsibility. And in my marriage, if my marriage is failing, it's my responsibility because I'm the head of that marriage. But to say that a husband never submits to a wife, I would say is a recipe for divorce. I would say it's pretty foolish to have that kind of demeanor. And so you have kind of both things in this chapter, which I thought was a really cool representation of what good, godly relationship looks like. And then number 5, we just have a couple more things. Virtue is a visible characteristic. Virtue is a visible characteristic. If you guys look again at verse 11, now my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. She had a reputation in her village for being virtuous. Often we think of characteristics like virtue or honesty, integrity as not being like tangible. It's not like we walk around with badges. Oh, you have the virtue badge. Nailed it. I have integrity and honesty. In fact, it kind of sounds like a political slogan. Zach, integrity, honesty. Like we have to tell people, convince people we have those things because there's no other ways for people to actually know if we have those qualities or characteristics, except there is. Be someone who's faithful, or in Ruth's case, someone who's virtuous. It was evident by the way that she lived everyday life to those around her. And again, not just in the big things, like she was following after her mother-in-law and being faithful and loyal to her, but her work ethic, the way she lived and the way she interacted with people. She had a reputation that attracted Boaz to her even before he met her. It's like, this is Ruth, right? I've heard of her. She's got a reputation. There's something tangible there, something I think we should all desire to exemplify. Because what did Jesus say about his disciples? He said, all this will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another. So love is something that can be seen. Often we think of it as something that's to be felt, but more importantly, it needs to be seen. Our actions not only speak louder than words, they're a witness of who Christ is in us. And we can embody what it means to be virtuous because Christ lives in us. We can live out a life of virtue, and people will see it, and they'll go, that's something I need. That's something I want. That's something, and especially in the opposite sex, something I desire. That's the person I want to be with. That's really cool. And when he's at work in our hearts and lives and we're in submission to him and his plans and his purposes, these qualities are the things we should be seeking most in ourselves and in those we're wanting to have a relationship that's any kind of meaningful. Because after all, beauty, as we've learned, is passing. Like beauty's fading. You can look for someone who's hot, but that's not going to last. So you should be looking for these intangible yet tangible qualities that can't be seen, yet they kind of can be seen. So there you go. Last one is this. A godly relationship is fulfilling. A godly relationship is fulfilling. And, Ruth left Boaz, but she had something she didn't have before she saw him. And obviously, you can talk about security and, love and fulfillment and redemption rights, blah, 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 blah. No, she left with handfuls of barley. That's what she took home, right? She left empty-handed. She came home overflowing. I think that's one of the trademarks of like a godly relationship is it should leave you filled. It's something that, again, a lot of times people talk about relationships with such a negative attitude. My wife and I get this sometimes, and we saw it with marriage. And when we were dating, people are like, "Oh, that's great, but marriage, it's not as much fun." And then when we were first married, they were like, "Well, it's like the hard years are coming. It's just a matter of time. Like your honeymoon's going to be over soon." And people always, and not everyone, but a lot of people would just kind of have like this negative outlook. And especially with kids, kids, oh man, that just will destroy your marriage. It's just going to make it so hard. And kids are the worst. And we're like, serious? Like, thanks everyone for making everything sound awful. And I would just say that's not the reality. If you have a godly relationship, there's godly marriage, godly kids, those are the things that fill your life the most. And, outside of your relationship with Christ, your marriage is going to be the most important relationship you ever have. And you want to be something that's actually fulfilling. You want to be something that, this is good. Like, I'm going to leave full. When I'm hanging out with my wife, I remember when I was dating her, actually, I remember even before I dated my wife, I would date, I didn't date a bunch of girls, but there's a couple of girls I dated, and I was kind of like, this is okay. Like, I suppose this is sufficient. And then I met my wife, and I was like, this is good. Like, this is how it should be. And if you're in the room tonight and you're dating someone right now, and you don't need to look at them and be like, maybe I'm coming to revelation that you're not the one, and you're going to be welcome to Dumpsville tonight. I apologize. That's not my intention. But again, I believe the marriage is so important that it's something that we shouldn't settle for. We shouldn't be like, yeah, I guess this is sufficient. Like, that's really what you want to think about your marriage. Like, it's again, the marriage is meant to both challenge and grow and support your walk with Christ. And so, like, you want to be something that brings you joy and fulfillment like no other relationship outside of Christ can, because that's exactly what God's designed it for. And then in that context of marriage, you get to have a family, you get to have children, which reflects how great your family is. It's like awesome. It's the most amazing thing God's ever done is the family unit. And it's something he wants us to know and have. And as we're seeking a relationship with Christ and we're sending our lives on him, he wants us to have the best. And if you're not married, you probably will be one day. And so, one, I would say pray for that person. Pray for yourself. Like, make that a priority in life. And don't settle for someone who's not going to fulfill you. And I'm not just speaking, sexually or financially with security or like provision, stuff like that. Find someone who's going to fulfill you in joy, who's going to bring you love and laughter, and ultimately who's going to draw you closer to the Lord. Because God's not in the business of like sufficient. Like, I want to give you all the blessings of heaven so your life is okay. Like, he came to give us a life that is above and beyond all that we could ask or think. He came, again, the thief came to destroy and steal and kill. He came to give us life and life abundant. That's the kind of life God wants for you, and that's the kind of relationship he wants you to have. And so do not settle for anything less than that. And if you have, in the areas and context of whatever sexual sin or whatever it is you settled, there's redemption to be found. That's another aspect of the story we find. There's redemption. Like, God can buy back lost years and time that we've had stolen from us, and he can restore and make right those things we've wronged. So let me pray for that over us tonight. Lord, thank you so much for your word and your biblical relationship advice. I just saw some things in this passage that I could relate to these guys. Thank you for that. But really, there are themes and principles here we find in Scripture. And one is, again, that abundant, overflowing life you promised to each of us. And it's not that it's going to be without trials, and it's not that marriage isn't hard work, because it is. But it's work that's worth it. And Lord, if you called us to be married, which most of us you have called to be married, Lord, if you called us to that relationship, God, I pray you would equip us to be godly men and women that we'd have some sense about us, who we are, and our expectations. And then you provide that person, Lord, that we're seeking. Lord, give us a godly spouse. Give us someone who desires you above all else, that is centered upon you, God, that's not caught up in the cares and weight of this world or sin and stuff like that. God, you just bring us someone who has expectations of godliness, and then that will foster that in us as well. Or we need people around us, especially our spouses, more than anyone else in our relationships, are going to be the one that either draw us closer to you or separate us from you. And so, guys, pray that we'd find people that are doing those things, Lord, drawing us to you and drawing us into just a deeper relationship with those that love you. And so, God, we love you. Thank you for the night. I just pray you be here in our fellowship as we're hanging out, God, and just encouraging us. And we ask this in your name. Amen.